You know how everyone just praises Super Mario 64 for being the most influential game of its generation for its genre of collectathons? So many people consider this game right here to be the greatest collectathon of all time. But not me. Super Mario 64 isn't even the best collectathon on its own console. The 90s were arguably the most important decade when it comes to the evolution of video games. Gone were the days of flat, two-dimensional games that only used like 2 buttons, and in was the birth of real 3D adventures. We all know the obvious games like Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, which really exemplified this change. But those 2 games were just that, just 2 games. There was a plethora of titles across many different developers, and some companies even drew their initial success from this rise, like Sony with the introduction of the PlayStation. All of the best companies and developers changed with the times, but there was one company that stood out from the rest, and that was none other than Rare. For those of you who are too young, you may be surprised to know that Rare used to be at the top of the video game world. They've put out some mediocre titles in the past 10 years to say the least, but we don't talk about those. They started developing games all the way back in the mid to late 1980s with amazing titles like Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Sesame Street. Wait, why were they so popular again? Like every company, they had many titles that ranged from amazing to what the f***. That was until they finally hit the big time with Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong was pretty much only seen as that giant King Kong ripoff that just stole Mario's girl before this game. But actually getting to play as Donkey Kong as the protagonist was an incredible change. The art style was almost as revolutionary as 3D on the N64. All the characters had a 3D appearance in a 2D world, which is one of the first of its kind. Rare really pushed the hardware of every console it produced games for, but this right here is a prime example of how ahead of the time they really were. They continued to produce fan favorite game after game seemingly every year. The N64 is full of their incredible titles. They of course kept going with Donkey Kong, creating their own 3D collectathon in Donkey Kong 64, where you can not only play as Donkey Kong, but also Diddy, Tiny, Lanky, and the thickest of boys, Chunky Kong. And I feel like I keep saying this, but there were so many more incredible titles that Rare produced for the N64. GoldenEye 007, Diddy Kong Racing, Perfect Dark, Conker's Bad Fur Day. It's so rare, pun incredibly intended, for a company to develop this many masterpieces one after another. And you know what's even more impressive when I haven't even mentioned the game that this video was about? The masterpiece of all Rare games and the greatest collectathon on the Nintendo 64, Banjo-Kazooie. This game was my childhood. Banjo-Kazooie was released in mid-1998, pretty much right in the heart and the height of the Nintendo 64. If you want to get technical, Banjo did make his first ever appearance as a racer in Diddy Kong Racing 1 year prior, but we're not talking about that, so who gives a fuck? Sorry, Diddy Kong Racing. I still love you. The game was also re-released on the Xbox 360 in 2008, but the only real difference is that it's in HD. Just watching the intro to Banjo-Kazooie gives me nostalgic flashbacks to playing this game as a kid. It is easily one of the best intros to any game I've ever played. It's nothing too dramatic or story heavy, and it's just plain fun and shows what this game is all about. Just compare it to Mario 64. Here we just have a logo and a dark and boring background, while here we got my dude Mumbo jamming on like 8 different instruments in a full-on jamboree. Even the file select screen has so much more personality than any game of its time. Normally you just get a little menu, which is perfectly fine because, let's be real, nobody expects a file select screen to be anything crazy. But Banjo-Kazooie says fuck that and has Banjo making soup and playing a goddamn Game Boy. That sounded a lot more exciting in my head. Right away, we are introduced to the main antagonist of the game, Gruntilda, who, I'll be 100% honest, she gave me nightmares as a kid when I first played this. Grunty wants to be the most beautiful woman in all the land, which, really, Grunty? I think Bottles is a more beautiful woman than you. She learns that Banjo's sister Tooty is cuter than her, so she heads out to steal her looks. Yeah, this is a weird-ass premise when you really think about it. Grunty, an old, thick-ass witch, wants to be as cute as Tooty, a little kid? Wait, how old the bears live until? 20 to 30 years, but most die earlier than that? So Tooty is what, like 2 to 3 years old, probably at the oldest? Grunty, you're f***ed up. Although, to be fair, I don't know if that's any weirder than a giant lizard dragon trying to get a human princess's giant personality! And speaking of personality, that's what really sets Gruntilda apart from other antagonists. She's not your average character who wants to kidnap some princess and rule the world like every Mario and Zelda game ever invented. All she wants is to be beautiful, and can we really blame her for that? Sure, she might look like Shrek's genital warts, but that's besides the point. She even rhymes, and who doesn't love a good nursery rhyme? This close to having bitch in a Nintendo game. The gameplay for Banjo-Kazooie is very similar to Super Mario 64. It's a 3D platform and a third-person perspective with solid controls. The game is accessible to anyone of any skill level because there's no crazy button combinations. You can jump, do backflips, and pretty much every attack is done by Kazooie pecking your enemies to death. It's basically the same controls as Mario 64, but this looks a lot cooler. There are some unique abilities, however, that you need to unlock by talking to bottles in certain levels, which is just perfect because I hate games that give you everything from the start. Make me actually earn my abilities. But what really sets Banjo-Kazooie apart are all the different power-ups that you can access. Now, I'm using the term power-up kinda loosely here because I don't really know exactly what to call these. Mumbo Jumbo not only has the greatest name in video game history, but he also transforms you into several different forms. You need to collect tokens to access these, and they range anywhere from a crocodile, a walrus, and a fucking pumpkin. I have never wanted to be a pumpkin so badly until this very moment. Each form has its own advantages to help you against different terrains or fit into certain areas. But you know what the best power-up is? You can wear boots and shoes. These seem like literally the simplest and most boring power-ups you could ever have, but they work so perfectly, especially with Kazooie's legs stretching like 6 feet. Not only does Banjo-Kazooie have some incredible power-ups, but there are also a few abilities that can only be used if you have certain items. You can shoot these blue eggs like bullets out of Kazooie's mouth, or just shit them out. Gold feathers let you turn invincible for a short time, and you can basically just bum rush any enemies. And red feathers allow you to fly in the air. But you do need to be on one of these specific panels in order to use the feathers to fly, which is a great idea because flying in a 3D world like this would be hella overpowered, so it's good that they sort of regulated it with these panels. There are also certain panels that let you perform these weird ass high jumps, and again, these would probably be overpowered as shit if you could do them anywhere, so good idea with the panels. Now if you thought the power-ups were unique, let's talk about the different worlds, and my God, this is good! There are 9 total worlds that are all connected to the hub world of Grunty's lair. This is an overworld if I've ever seen one. And if you know anything about me, you know that I hate games that have bad hub worlds. I'm looking at you, Sticker Star. This layer is huge! You'll access one area and be like, wow, this is pretty big. But then you need to unlock even more and it just keeps going and going and I love it! It feels like such a dark layer, which fits Grunty perfectly, but there's also such bright and colorful areas that all blend together so well. Every level has a little section before it which represents the world perfectly. This is easily one of the most interactive and well-connected overworlds I have ever seen. And the worlds, they're just so good. Every world feels completely different, which is exactly what I love about 3D games like this. I don't like when a game's levels all have the same feel or vibe like Mario Sunshine. Don't get me wrong, I love that game, but since it takes place on a tropical island, all the levels feel pretty similar. While Banjo-Kazooie has tropical, desert, forest, snow, and whatever the fuck you want to consider Clanker's Cavern. Yes, I know it's a cavern, I can read, but it's not your everyday cavern. Everything is so mechanical and it isn't like a normal cave that you might expect. Plus, there's a giant fucking robot shark in the center of the cavern. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen that in a cavern before. I don't think there was one world in this entire game that I don't just absolutely love. Most games have at least one level that fans don't enjoy, but I've never really heard any hate for any level. Well, except for Mad Monster Mansion. Oh, fuck you too. What really sets these worlds apart are the variety of characters and enemies that you encounter. Every world has completely different enemies that fit the vibe perfectly. Swamp? Boom, crocodiles. Desert? Boom, giant bugs. Shipyard? Boom, ring buoys of death. You will never see enemies or characters like this in any other series. And just think about Super Mario 64 for a second. How many characters do you actually talk to? Toads? Bob-ombs? And a few bosses? That's nothing compared to Banjo-Kazooie. You got Bottles too. Okay, I'll be fair, this is basically just this game's version of Toad. But there are so many random enemies that you can talk to which adds way more character and immersion to the world as a whole. Anything from crabs, to termites, to even literal blocks of ice will talk to you. This shouldn't make sense, but it does. There are actual NPCs in the game which makes the world more than just collecting stuff. I love reading this game's dialogue, which is nothing that I would ever say from Mario 64. Even the fucking collectibles talk to you. I can't believe I've gone this long without even mentioning what you need to search for in this game. There are 100 Jiggies in this game for you to collect. These are found throughout every level, plus there are several found in Grunty's lair. And can we take a second to appreciate the name Jiggy? So much more creative than Star. These Jiggies allow you to fix pictures of levels, which is how you advance in the game. Not only do you need Jiggies to advance, but the game also has tons of music notes that you need to collect to open doors in Gruntilda's lair. There are 100 of them in every level, and you actually need to collect a good portion of them to progress. You don't get a Jiggy for all 100, but you do get a nice congratulatory message from Bottles, and isn't that better? No? Well, sorry, you're not getting anything better. This game is the true definition of an open world adventure. There's no level select screen for each world, and you can literally do whatever you want in every level. Collecting a Jiggy doesn't take you out of the level, and you can just continue exploring. It's honestly kind of similar to Mario Odyssey in that way, which I definitely prefer. Nothing is blocked off other than some things you need certain abilities for, but there's no set orders to collect the Jiggies in. Some Jiggies require you to beat a boss, some require good platforming, some require Mumbo's transformations, and some are just out in the fucking open with no effort required. There are also 5 Jinjos in every level, which gives you a Jiggy too. This is basically the equivalent to an 8 red coin star, but way better because Jinjos have more than just one color. Every Jiggy is fun to collect, and 100 is such a more satisfying number than 120. Small nitpick, I know, but it's true, don't deny it. Once you collect enough Jiggies and notes, you can access the final level where you face your most difficult challenge yet. A quiz show! This is such a perfect idea for a villain like Grunty, who's so whimsical and charming. And I don't mean charming as in looks, God no. Ugh. The questions and challenges are all based around different aspects of the game, from enemy names, spelling your name backwards, and what enemy makes a certain sound. Grunty's Furnace Fun is all about the fun, except when you accidentally click something wrong on one of the instant death questions and you have to start over, son of a bitch! The final battle with Grunty is a perfect test of all the abilities you've gained throughout the game. Fighting on the ground, flying through the sky, shooting eggs, and it's an actual challenge which can take you a while. I'm not gonna say it's the most difficult fight in the world, but it's so much better than throwing Bowser into bombs. There's different phases which each require different strategies. Plus, what's better than reviving the ultimate Jinjo and watching him pound her over and over until he finally pegs Grunty right in her green snout and off the ledge to victory? So satisfying! Gruntilda falls all the way back down to Spiral Mountain, where I'm sure she'll be fine. Holy shit! The game then ends with Banjo and the squad wrestling on the beach, which is a perfect, happy ending. Oh, and they threw in a boob joke too. I love you, Rare. Banjo-Kazooie is the best collectathon on the Nintendo 64. Better than Super Mario 64. Yeah, I said it, and it might be the greatest ever. This is a perfect example of a game ahead of its time. The game is truly an open world with literally no order to collect anything. All the enemies and characters have so much variety and they are actually likable. The credits even tell you the name of literally every single enemy and character in the game. I didn't need to know what the fucking bucket was called, but I'm so happy they told me. Everything is connected beautifully, every world is different, and the game has so much replayability. I really feel like Super Mario Odyssey took some inspiration from this game looking back at it. People love to say that Nintendo went back to the roots of open world adventures like Mario 64 or Sunshine, but Odyssey is so much more like Banjo-Kazooie than either of those titles, and that's what makes it so amazing. If you're a game developer, use Banjo-Kazooie as a reference for how to make a collectathon. It is perfect. This will always be one of my favorite games of all time. I spent countless hours playing it throughout the years, and I've played it so many times and pretty much play it every year. It even got the sequel that it deserved a few years later in Banjo-Tooie. Great name, by the way. Hopefully one of these days we can finally get the Banjo 3E that we've all been waiting for. Wait. No. No! No!